Are Chelsea good again? Well, I'm joined by JJ Bull.
Hi.
Jon Mackenzie.
Also hi.
And Liam Twomey.
I feel like I need to point now.
I think you should point to discuss whether Chelsea are, in fact, good again. Let's start with you, JJ. What do you think to the central question? Are they better?
Well, they're currently 4th in the Premier League, which is good. And it's better. Well, is it? Because the expected point says they should be roughly around 5th, so round about 4th. That's one below 4th, as you'll have noticed, in 5th. But last season, they were expected to finish round about 5th. They finished 6th in the end. So they're actually round about kind of where they were last season. By the end of last season, they were actually quite a good team. It's just that there's a bunch of noise around them about it being nuts with how many players they've signed and all this sort of stuff. In terms of whether they're different or not, the most interesting statistical thing I could find between Pochettino's Chelsea and Maresca's is that they make fewer short passes. That's about the only difference really I could find. It's not even that interesting. And what you have to consider as well is that I think the transfers, they're still making lots, but they've slowed down a little bit because Pochettino was dealing with lots of first team players coming in. I think he had 9 first teamers that joined the season before that. They had about 400 that joined before that. So what you're seeing is a bit of squad resting because Maresca is dealing with around about, well, I'd say maybe 1, 2, 3, like they're mostly squad players, really. They're not first teamers that he's brought in.
Yeah,
some of
many of the
starting.
players that have settled under Maresca are players that came in under Pochettino, right?
Exactly. So you've got a little bit of a squad kind of going with there. But there's differences, of course, in how they're actually playing on the pitch, what the tactics look like, and can show you that a little bit. So Pochettino was mostly a kind of 4-2-3-1. You had these guys here, and then you had fullbacks going forward, maybe Reece James, but Cucurella by the end was also inverting either to play alongside 2 midfielders or as part of a 3 as well, which is something that Maresca does. Because Maresca likes playing these inverted fullbacks. But what Maresca is doing is playing 1 central player here and then 2 players in half spaces. It's sort of staggered like this. It's not straight away like how Man City play, how you think of Man City. But you have this little bit here where you have Palmer and Enzo Fernandez, whoever's there, can play up and down in these half spaces. But what happens when they move forward is that you get this front attacking 5. Palmer and Enzo around here, Castillo here. And then what happens is Cucurella will join a back 3 who can move across like this. And then Malo Gusto, who's currently the one not injured at right back at the moment, will come inside. So you get this double pivot in here like this. And the idea is then that when you're playing against an opposition team, you can get these players in pockets of space to be able to play through. And you also have a chance to defend against transitions. So it's all about keeping control of the ball, but defending against transitions with this sort of shape. One of the things that he talks about on a coach's voice video is talks about the reason you have this box here, because that gives you a 4v3 if you're playing against a 4-3-3. If they shift this and this guy moves forward and you're trying to block with a 2, then of course you have these players here, they might go tight here, but then you might free up other people. And if you have a team playing against you in a 4-4-2 like this is your 2-4-2, back 4 here, you drop in the forward to join in here, so you get a 5v4 basically in this sort of position. So everything is designed to deal with the opposition, how you can create space. If they're going man-to-man with you, so say you do get players of the opposition going man-to-man with your team, you've got really good players 1v1 in a man-to-man system so that you can then effectively, once you get the ball to them, they can beat that player. Because you have such good players, which Chelsea do, they've signed a lot of them, they are really able to go and cause trouble. But what you also get is like Sancho and Madueke are dropping deep, not just staying high all the time, and then they can help you get out of danger, play little 1-2s and get forward, and then they have supporting players. And you've seen like in recent weeks against Bournemouth, you had Cucurella making these surging runs, underlapping here, so Sancho could come inside. Lots of clever combinations. The squad looks like they know what they're doing, they have clear instructions going forward, but the real star of it is Cole Palmer, who is producing ridiculous numbers. Until Harry Kane scored a bunch of goals recently, he had the most goals and assists, most goal contributions of any player in the top 5 leagues over the last 2 seasons.
I think, in fact, I once heard Liam on the Athletic FC podcast refer to the number of hat-tricks that Cole Palmer had.
That was his 3rd match ball. He's played fewer than 40 games for Chelsea. He's got as many hat-tricks as Drogba and Lampard now. So this guy has elevated himself in rapid time to really lofty conversations, to the point where despite how crazy Erling Haaland's start to the season was, it is a legitimate conversation, I think, whether Cole Palmer is the best attacker in the Premier League.
It's weird that we cut to a clip of you, isn't it? Because you could have said that here. But instead we cut to a clip of the Athletic FC podcast, which runs most days and is just terrific content. No need for you to talk here. Now, JJ, please continue with Cole Palmer.
Well, Palmer is, under Pochettino, is playing mostly off the right wing, but he was also playing as a number 10 at certain times when Conor Gallagher wasn't there, and you were telling me earlier, Liam, that often Gallagher would go out to the right-hand side to play with it. But Palmer is having slightly fewer touches, making slightly fewer passes this season, but everything he's doing is within a system that just suits everything he does. He's able to control games in little bits and pieces. I don't want to say like Messi because it's ridiculous, but like the way he drifts in and in out of play exactly the right time and makes the right decisions. And I think the best players in the world are the ones who make the best decisions. And Palmer consistently does it. Against Brighton, we saw it quite a lot. Like they're playing a really high line. And what Palmer was doing, it's not just decision making, it's the execution of it. The technique's perfect. So he just drop into a little bit of space and they'll be pinging the ball around and you just play the first time pass. No one else can see it because he's seen a player running in behind to get behind this high line. Everything he's doing is top, highest level possible. But it just doesn't seem like he should be one of the best players in Europe. It doesn't seem like he should be, yet I increasingly think he definitely is.
I think the interesting thing about the way that Chelsea are playing structurally is that I think it's designed to actually create space for Palmer. So much of what inverting the fullback is about creating tension in the field around where Palmer is so that he can find that space and can be dangerous. So generally speaking, when you're coming up, teams tend to defend out of a 4-4-2 shape in the Premier League these days. Just gives you really nice coverage. And because obviously against a back four, you've got 4 players who can jump up, you're covering in the midfield, etc. The problem is when this player inverts like this, the question is, what do you do with that player? How do you now start treating that player as a marking responsibility? Because the obvious thing to do is pull your wide forward into that area. But now what you've done, because everyone else is going to shift across here, is you're going to create tension between these two players. These two players here. If this player comes across to Mark, this player's Madueke is 1v1. If Palmer drifts into this space, the question is who is going to follow him. And I think so much of what Chelsea's system is designed to do is to create that kind of tension so that Palmer can drop into those spaces. He's super dangerous from a creative point of view, but he's also a really good ball carrier as well. And so you're going to be in these scenarios where, you've got Madueke 1-to-1. You don't want this player to come across and to Palmer and then leave Madueke in that 1v1 scenario, because then you've got, as you were saying before, JJ, this situation where it's very easy to get Madueke into these areas where he's going to cause loads of problems in an individual sense. And so the whole system really just revolves around creating these tensions.
The question from me, I suppose, would be, when I'm thinking about this in the context of Chelsea's broader improvement, it's hard for me not to question how much of it is Cole Palmer, or how much has the team actually improved? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say more of what they did last season was down to Cole Palmer. I mean, there was the infamous Cole Palmer FC moniker, which Mauricio Pochettino was eager to shed when they went to Arsenal and then promptly got destroyed without him. This season, yes, he's every bit as influential, if not more so, but the ecosystem, I think, is a bit better for him in attack, as JJ laid out. He's not starting on the right flank and moving in as a number 10. He's starting in that right half space, which is where he does all of his best work, really. And he's got the freedom to move within Maresca's system and interpret the game as he sees fit from that starting position. So sometimes you'll see him running into the number 9 position, and Nicholas Jackson's natural instinct is to drift over to the left because he was once a left winger. So there's quite a nice balance there in the way that they dovetail. I think they've already set up a lot of goals for each other in the last 2 years. I think they're on track to actually break the Lampard-Drogba connection record if they keep going at their current pace in a year or two. So that's a really good thing. He's also got really good chemistry with Noni Madueke, and the fact that you've moved him slightly more in field allows Madueke to get in the team. And he's the one winger Chelsea have who's really explosive on ball in terms of the way he can create advantages. And that was actually something we saw in the last game against Nottingham Forest.
So I've got a couple of screenshots to show you what this looks like. This is Forest at the weekend. They're defending out of a 4-4-2, as we said. And what they're doing here is, because you can see Malagusto's coming inside, you've got the 2 strikers up against the 2 centre-backs, and then the far side winger, he's keeping Cucurella quiet. This is the other side winger, and you can see that he's aware of where Cole Palmer is, but as soon as Malagusto comes inside, the question is what's going to happen. Malagusto comes inside, and then that near side winger drops in to mark him. Already you're creating that space here, and you have that tension between, we've got one Chelsea player here, one Chelsea player here, these 2 players covering them. What's going to happen when Cole Palmer moves into that space.
What is going to happen?
Well,
Charles?
in this instance, what happens is one of the central midfielders stays across to keep him quiet, keep him covered. But what you then end up happening is, as we were talking about before, you start generating these overloads in the midfield area. So you now got 2 Chelsea midfielders with just 1 Forest player around them. So in a build-up situation now, you would hope to be able to work the ball around to be able to benefit from that 2v1. Obviously, like the other central midfielder is covering Enzo as well. So what's happening here now is you're creating space between the two. That means that Nicholas Jackson, as you can see here, can drop into that space as well and find it. This is the goal that Chelsea scored against Forest, and you can see the benefits of this system in action, right? Because what happens is you get the overload on the far side. Cole Palmer is able to find space because the inverting fullback is here, so the wide forward has pulled across. The ball can get played through to Cole Palmer, and now I think this is Alex Moreno. He's got a tension between, do I go to Palmer or do I go to Madueke?
That's a pretty serious tension,
That's a pretty serious tension, because what's going to happen is you'll end up with this player coming across here, the centre midfielder coming across here, and what you've done then is you've got 1v1 matchups across the back line, and in the end you get Madueke in this 1v1 against Moreno, who's facing down the field. He cuts inside and then bends it in. So you can see the way that the system is designed to create those tensions around Palmer in order to benefit him.
It's quite nice to see that kind of analysis, actually, because this is how will go under the radar a lot, but this is how good teams make their best players better.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and this is a conversation we've been having about Chelsea from the beginning of this season, because we know they've got incredible players, and we know that Maresca is a sort of systems coach, and everyone sees him as, I guess, Pep Guardiola light. But actually what I've seen from them in many respects from a tactical point of view, it's just very basic. Just have this structure. They use pretty much the same structure. They can invert fullbacks from either side, but you're going to want to do it around Cole Palmer, as we said, because it creates these tensions. But all they've done really is create a very basic structure which gives them lots of upside, and then they have the players in that structure to really cause problems. Like if you've got a player like Noni Madueke, get him into a 1v1 and he'll be better than fullback.
This is funny, because this is what I found like researching it all over the last couple of days, is that there's not, you think of it as going to be like really Guardiola-esque and really rigid and all these exact things, and it totally isn't. It just looks like it is quite similar to what was happening last season almost, but you get your best players in the right positions, and that's where you get the benefit from it. And things like they're sort of made for PPDA on Wyscout, like how often the opposition is allowed to pass before you press them. And I wonder if that's because if you let them play it a little bit more, you then create a bit of space in behind for players like Madueke, Sancho and Jackson to run into behind. So you're creating little moments where you can then exploit it, especially if you have like Fernandes or Palmer who can then play that ball in behind.
JJ's kind of alluded already to what's changed and what's consistent on the field with Pochettino, but what are some of the other changes from the Pochettino era to the now Maresca era?
Yeah, so I think we referred to the inverting fullbacks. I think that has a couple of knock-on effects. I wrote about Enzo Fernandez on The Athletic in the last few days, how his role has slightly changed. He's still operating high up the pitch, which he did under Pochettino, but he's touching the ball a lot less actually, in the defensive and middle thirds of the pitch. He's not really as involved in Chelsea's build-up, and that's partly because there isn't really space for him to do that, or a need for him to do that if say, Cucurella or Gusto are inverting next to Caicedo. So that means I think a lot of what he's trying to do is more focused on the final third. There's been mixed returns to that, I think, for Enzo Fernandez. He hasn't got a goal or an assist yet. He has had some very nice moments passing, but he often feels like he's sometimes just occupying space in the system. And his single best attribute, which is finding those progressive passes, he can't do that as much when he's ahead of the ball, receiving it with his back to goal. But it also means that when Chelsea lose the ball, when that happened under Pochettino, Fernandes was so far ahead of the play that he couldn't help out, and Caicedo had this sea of space to defend all on his own, and it meant games became really, really chaotic for Chelsea and impossible to manage. There's still been a tendency for Chelsea games to become a bit chaotic and transitional under Maresca at times, but because they've got that fullback sitting in there next to Caicedo, they're less immediately vulnerable through the middle of the pitch. They can still be exposed if teams get the ball wide against them early.
They basically defend with 5 and attack with 5. So they've got, that's the idea, right? So rather than Pochettino might have left maybe just 4 back, if he's got 2 holders and 2 centre backs, but now they have that bit to look after the team in transition. But like you said, they still get caught. Like, it's not perfect, and they've not played many big teams so far this season. Yeah,
and part of that might be flaws in the system. Part of that might just be execution. You know, they're still learning how to play this way. And the message that we got from people at Chelsea coming into the season was they didn't actually expect the results in the first half of the season to be brilliant. They thought Chelsea would get stronger as the season went along. So I think the general mood is pretty encouraged that they're already in the top 4 after the first 7 games. The biggest change probably of role individually has been Malo Gusto, because last year he was this swashbuckling, overlapping fullback who really for the first time properly mitigated Reece James's prolonged absences from this team. But now he's hardly doing that at all. He still does it occasionally, but mostly he's sitting in and he's leaning on his experience in Lyon's academy, where he played a lot as an attacking midfielder before he became a fullback. So Chelsea are depending on his midfield skill set now.
Okay. We've had a nice chat about some of the positives. Liam has alluded to some of the things to be aware of, maybe to be a bit cautious about. What would worry you as a Chelsea fan, John?
I'm not a Chelsea fan, but if I were one, yeah, I guess the positives massively outweigh the negatives here. I think, as Liam was saying, I don't think anyone expected Chelsea to hit the ground as runningly as they have done. But I would say that I went through and watched all of the Chelsea goals back, and what I would say is that a lot of the goals that Chelsea seem to be generating at the moment are generated in relatively direct attacking scenarios. So situations where the opposition are leaving them space to attack. And with the players that they have, it's just a totally terrifying prospect if you've got players like Nicholas Jackson, Madueke, Sancho and Cole Palmer, of course, running at you in those transition moments. You're often in quite a bit of trouble. What that means to me is that I'm interested to see what happens when those sorts of game states change a bit, because there will come a point where teams recognise if we are open against Chelsea, they will just finish us off, and that will mean they'll start sitting a little bit deeper. And then the question is, how sustainable is their structure to actually achieve ball progression when you're facing a mid-block where teams are being ultra careful not to allow the ball through into your forwards with any sort of space around them. And one of the things I have noticed from Maresca's time at Chelsea, but also his time at Leicester in the division below, a lot of the time the ball progression that they are trying to do is quite direct. So with someone like Guardiola, someone like Roberto De Zerbi, a lot of the build-up is sort of very patient. You're moving the ball through lines of pressure, you're creating space, and then moving patiently, you're trying to force the opposition back into that low block that you then try and break down. Whereas I'd say with Maresca's teams, a lot of the time it is about creating space, but we've already talked about, if you get your 2 8s wide, you pull the midfield around so that there's lots of space. Often what you'll see is very direct passes into either Jackson or one of the 2 8s as well, creating space into that second line. And then it's quick turn and run at the back line. And I think teams will start trying to problematize that, stop it being so easy to do. When that kind of happens, the question is, how good are this team going to be at breaking down mid blocks, breaking down low blocks? And I think that's maybe where some of the questions for me arise, because often what happens in those scenarios is you need some way to break open the game. So we talked already about the Nottingham Forest game at the weekend. That was a game where, Forest weren't even particularly low block in that game. They were very, I would say, conscientious mid block. They did go down to 10 men for the last, it ended up being about 20 minutes with added time. And even then, I didn't think that they particularly sat back. They had a few chances towards the end of the game. Chelsea did create a few chances in that. There was a Nkunku chance right at the end in that game. But again, that came from a transitional moment. I think there was only one chance when Forest were down to 10 men that was actually generated around building, around a low block and trying to create a chance. And it was a Joao Felix header that narrowly missed. So the big question for me is, how are they going to perform at breaking down those low blocks? And one of the things I think that informs this is how well they're doing from set pieces right now, because set pieces are a really good way of breaking open those even game states so that teams then have to try and score against you, and then suddenly you're creating more of those transitional moments, which we know Chelsea are going to be good at. Here's the open play XG table. Chelsea have the highest open play XG, but when we actually flip it the other way around and look at set piece XG, this is now inverse. Chelsea are the worst team when it comes to set-piece expected goals created, which is interesting because Chelsea have just hired Brentford's set-piece coach, Bernardo Cueva, to oversee the sort of overhaul of their set-piece approaches.
5 shot creating actions from dead balls, I read, which is very low. Like, a lot lower than everyone else by miles. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the question is how much you read into that. I mean, at this point, I don't think that much. It's only 7 games in at the moment.
You told me last night that being like one of the best at set pieces in the league is a really strong correlation with winning the league, right? Or if you look at every team that wins the league in any of the top 5 leagues, almost always they're in the top 3 for
should be
set
25% of your goals should be set pieces.
Right. There you go.
Yeah, and so
good news for Arsenal fans, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to challenge for the title, you're almost always going to be amongst the best set piece takers.
Who takes their set pieces routinely?
It's a mixture. So Cole Palmer will deliver in swingers from the right, in swinging corners from the right, and Enzo Fernandez will often do it from the left, although this became a bone of contention against Nottingham Forest when he twice failed to clear the first man in the second half to audible groans from the Matthew
The
Harding
worst sin for a fan, isn't it?
There's nothing more viscerally frustrating, I think, for football supporters. But just to say on the set piece situation, I think partly at both ends of the pitch, they are slightly limited by their personnel.
Yeah.
They're a small team and not an especially physical team. And I guess Arsenal have shown you can run ingenious plays for one guy in Gabriel. Maybe they can do that with Wesley Fofana, who's like the one vertical athlete they've got.
Yeah, I think it's Fofana and maybe Lynn Colwell, but then very quickly I think the aerial threat drops off, and that does become a problem. But I suppose, again, this sort of ties into the way that Chelsea have approached things, which is they're bringing in sort of these elite, exciting, high technical players. It does mean that you're going to sort of shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to actually having the sorts of players who can bring it, who can produce threat from set pieces. And like Arsenal's the classic example, right? Is that with Arsenal, if you go back to the open play XG table, Arsenal are down in 6th. So they're creating much less open play XG than some of the teams above them. And I think most people would think the more open play XG you're creating, the better you are as a team. But they're making up that difference because they're at the other end of this table. They're propping up this table with, I think, over 3.5 expected goals generated from set pieces. And as you say, with Gabriel, it's a cheat code, so you're probably going to score above your expected anyway. So this is one of the areas where I think that the question is like, how are Chelsea going to deal with this? How are they going to deal with that shift into being a team that are going to be forced to be, I guess, protagonists against very antagonist opponents who are going to sit in deeper, force them to actually generate chances and then try and hit them on the break, which is, it's what you want to do as an elite team. You want to have consistent ball progression just given to you by the opponents because they're just going to be like, have the ball, we'll sit in, try and break us down. I think mid blocks could be a problem, but I think that if you get good enough at them, you then force these low blocks, and then it's like, well, how are we going to find the edge? And I think set pieces is one of those.
I mean, interesting challenges to come. It's a 2-part transitional phase, isn't it? Anyway, Phil Hay, tell me something interesting.
Here's lesson of the week for footballers worldwide. Buy yourself a dishwasher. Why? Because believe it or not, Ipswich Town's Axel Tuanzebe is out for a month after injuring himself washing up. Ipswich called it a very unfortunate accident, and they haven't said exactly what happened, but I'm assuming there was something sharp in the water. If you'd like more stories like this, and all the big breaking news from football Monday to Friday, sign up to the Athletic FC newsletter and it'll drop straight into your inbox.
Thanks, Phil Hay. That was interesting. Now, to round out the show, the last thing I really want to talk about is what Chelsea's expectations, hopes, desires would be for the season, Liam. I mean, what do you think their expectations are? Because you've alluded already to the fact that maybe they're performing a bit better than they thought they might.
They feel like there's a top 4 level of talent in this squad. I don't think that's an unreasonable conclusion to reach given the amount of money that has been invested and the amount of talent that they've brought in. So Maresca's job, his primary aim has to be to deliver on that promise because Chelsea have been out of the Champions League now for 2 years. It's a big problem for the overall business model if they don't get that revenue. And it's also big for their prestige. It will steadily over time, I think Arsenal had this as well, in the midst of their lengthy rebuild, it becomes a little bit harder to attract the best young players in the world, which is what Chelsea are targeting in every transfer window, it seems. So top 4 is absolutely the number 1 priority. I think there's a level of realism. I think they know they're not as good as Manchester City and Arsenal. Even Manchester City without Rodri, Arsenal without Odegaard for a bit. I think they know they're a tier below those teams. Liverpool, we'll see.
Liverpool,
yeah, Liverpool have started really well. We'll see whether they maintain that standard, but they have a pedigree that Chelsea don't. So I think Chelsea are primarily looking to be top of that next mini table of teams with aspirations to be regular Champions League teams.
Yeah, I mean, to that like next mini table, JJ, when you think about the competitors that Chelsea have for 4th place, what is it? Is that fully with confidence for Chelsea fans?
I think Chelsea are good for it, yeah. I think we'll see... it reminds me a little bit of when Guardiola first went into Man City, and then there were problems they had where they were getting beaten in transition quite a lot, and they conceded more goals than they probably should have done. And the teams who tend to win things or do really well have a very low XGA, expected goals against, and they concede very few goals, whereas Chelsea last season conceded loads, like 60-something goals, can't remember exactly what it was. This season, that record seems to be a bit better already, so that might be squeezing it in, and they'll have more control, but we'll learn a lot more for the next 10 games, obviously, because that's how football works. The more games you play, the more you see how they're playing. But other teams have issues, like Aston Villa have European football. They were great against Bayern Munich, but then looked a little bit tired, maybe just mentally fatigued against United the game afterwards. Brighton can't quite figure them out just yet. Newcastle can't quite figure them out, whether they are actually good or not. I don't think Fulham will be there. Tottenham should push up a little bit and get closer to it as well. So the most likely candidate to battle them will be Spurs. Liverpool's fixture list coming up is really interesting because that could easily take them down a couple of spaces.
Tough games after
They've got all the best
international
teams in the
break.
world,
Yeah.
and Everton in the next little while, so they've got that going on.
The best teams in the world and Everton.
Yeah, and Brighton twice, back to back. Like I think we talked about this earlier in the season. We thought people were sort of laughing at Chelsea for all the noise and all the players are bringing in all the chaos.
I mean, it was funny as well.
It was quite funny.
Yeah.
But it turns out if you just buy really good players and then you put them on a pitch with a rough, decent structure, you do okay in the end.
Yeah.
I think when we were doing our Premier League prediction table, the question was like, who do you put higher, Tottenham or Chelsea? Because both of them they had unknowns about them. I think we both went for Chelsea 4th and then Spurs 5th. But Spurs obviously a little bit hit and miss at the moment. You never quite know what's going to happen in their games. So I think off the back of that, Spurs were the only ones who are a real threat to that 4th place. So I think beyond that, Villa, again, they're in sort of strange territory. They're not in Kansas anymore, Toto territory with the Champions League. So we're going to have to see how that plays
They're
out.
out there beating Bayern Munich.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Takes a toll.
It does. And you know, it's tough, I think, to have, even just on the level of like squad, comparing that squad to the other squads of Chelsea, certainly, to a lesser extent, maybe Spurs. Rotation obviously has to come in there, and then there will come that fatigue of when they have all of those games sort of squeezed together.
Newcastle's a direct example of that from last season, had the exact same issue, right?
Yeah. Newcastle, great example of that. And then Brighton, I think with Brighton, again, it's like, yes, it's a fun squad. They don't have the depth. They don't have European competition, which I think will, be a benefit to them. But do they have enough to actually challenge for a sustained period of time for that 4th spot? Probably not. So right now, it's looking pretty, I'd say, pretty rosy for Chelsea, because it looks as though 4th place is theirs for the taking.
On that depth front, Maresca has an option that wasn't really available to Mauricio Pochettino. And the Bournemouth game really showed this more than any other, which is on days when they are outplayed, when they don't execute the system particularly well, when players maybe just aren't quite at it, they still have the firepower, not just in the starting lineup, but the individual quality coming off the bench. I mean, he's been bringing on Christopher Nkunku, who we haven't even mentioned in this discussion. And I think he's one of the 3 or 4 best footballers in the squad. João Felix, Mykhailo Mudryk, Pedro Neto. Yeah. There's a lot of individual quality there that they can bring on if the starters aren't working for whatever reason, and win games they shouldn't win, or turn what would be defeats, which I think actually you could make a decent argument that the Forest game in the last 2 years would have been a defeat much more often than it would have been a draw for Chelsea, the way Forest set up and executed their game plan. So that's something I think Chelsea will hope for as well, that even on days when it doesn't work, which you do get in a long season, they have a level of firepower to get them out of trouble that a lot of their rivals don't.
Okay. And they won't be bothered by Europe because they just play a different 11.
Yeah.
So like they have one 11 for Premier League in the real games, and then against Ghent the other day they had an entirely different first 11. Because Palmer's not even in the squad, I don't think, for the European games.
No, they've rested him for the group stage.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, I feel like I know the answer to this question then, but let's do it for format anyway. Yes, no, please. Are they good again?
Yes.
Are they good again?
Great, no, good, yes.
Are they good again?
Yes.
I didn't ask great, Liam. He's not coming back, this guy.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.